Welcome back to the Midgard Archives. Step into the light and out of the cold. We have spent our journey ascending the jagged, stone-cracked peaks of the high mountains to face the trolls. Those massive manifestations of the wild earth that turn to granite in the sun. We have felt the weight of the mountain's silence and the terror of the mountain taking. But now, the archives lead us back down. We follow the mountain streams into the rushing rapids of the Kraken, through the dark pines of the Huldra, and past the burial mounds of the Drog. Finally, the land ends. Before us lies the North Sea, a vast, grey, and lightless expanse that has claimed more souls than every war in Scandinavian history combined. In the archives, the sea is not merely a body of water, it is a shroud. Beneath its surface lies a world that operates on a scale humans were never meant to understand. Tonight we descend into the lightless, frozen depths to face the ultimate entity of the unheard North. He is the island that breathes. He is the shadow beneath the hull. He is the master of the Maelstrom. He is the Kraken. Chapter 2. The Cartography of Fear, Olaus Magnus and the Sea Worm. To understand the Kraken, we must first look at the map. In the 1539 Carta Marina by Olaus Magnus, the waters surrounding Norway and Iceland are not empty. They are populated by nightmares. The archives preserve these early maps not as works of art, but as records of a terrifying reality where the horizon was a predatory boundary. Magnus described a creature he called the sea worm, or the great serpent of the deep, a being 200 feet long that could snap a galleon like a dry twig. But the archives distinguish the Kraken from the mere serpent. The word Kraken itself comes from the Old Norse krak, referring to something twisted, gnarled, or stunted, like a rotted tree. To the 16th century sailor, the Kraken was a biological island, a mass of flesh so immense it influenced the very tides. Our archives contain notes from the Zeno map as well, where entire landmasses in the North Atlantic were marked Island of the Sleeper. These were not islands of soil and stone, but islands of flesh. The archives suggest that early cartographers were not drawing myths, they were drawing warnings. Chapter 3. The Island of Deception. Geography as a Predator. In the earliest manuscripts of the Midgard Archives, dating back to the 12th century, the Kraken was often described as a geographical error rather than a beast. This is the horror of the Hafgufa and the Lyngbakr, the sea mist and the heatherback. The Konung's Skugstjør, the King's Mirror, written around 1250, describes the Hafgufa as the greatest of all sea monsters. It would surface only when the sea was still. It appeared to be two massive pillars of rock rising from the water. Sailors would see these pillars and believe they were entering a natural harbor. They would drop anchor, only to realize the rocks were the monster's nostrils, and the harbor was its mouth. Sailors would report finding new islands where none appeared on their charts. These islands appeared lush with seaweed, and were always surrounded by an unnatural abundance of fish. Desperate and hungry crews would land their ships, step onto the soil, and prepare to rest. But the law provides a terrifying warning. The moment they lit their cooking fires, the island would tremble. The earth would reveal itself to be cold, leathery, ancient skin. This is the ultimate revealing horror, a theme we have tracked from the Huldra's hollow back to the brook horse's stretching spine. The island would sink, dragging every man and every mast into the crushing dark of the abyss. Chapter 4. The Biological King. Erik Pontoppidan's testimony. In 1752, Erik Pontoppidan, the Bishop of Bergen, published his Natural History of Norway. The archives regard this as the first scientific shield, an attempt to categorize the impossible through observation. Pontoppidan recorded testimonies from hundreds of fishermen who claimed the Kraken's back was often 1.5 miles in circumference. He described the creature's feeding strategy with chilling precision. The sweet law. The Kraken would release a thick, sweet-smelling excrement into the water. This was not waste, but a pheromonal bait. The swarm. This scent attracted millions of fish, creating a localized feeding frenzy. The trap. Fishermen, seeing the abundance, would cast their nets over the monster. They called this fishing over the Kraken, a higher-risk, high-reward gamble that often ended in death. The descent. When full, the Kraken simply submerged, creating a vacuum, the Maelstrom, that swallowed ships whole. Pontoppidan's writings suggest that the Kraken was so massive it had its own internal ecosystem. He wrote of birds that would nest on the creature's back when it surfaced, believing it to be a permanent island, only to be drowned when the Titan returned to the deep. Chapter 5. Archived account. The log of the Dannebrog, 1782. Our archives contain a rare, salt-stained logbook from a Danish merchant vessel named the Dannebrog. In the autumn of 1782, the ship was off the coast of Norway when the sea became unnaturally still, like a sheet of grey glass. The captain recorded that the water suddenly began to boil without heat. Thousands of deep-sea fish creatures, rarely seen by human eyes, leaped onto the deck of the ship as if fleeing a fire in the deep. Then the horizon rose. A mass of dark, slimy flesh, the color of a bruised sky, surfaced 1/2 league away. The crew did not see eyes initially. They saw only the writhing of countless arms, each thick as an oak tree. The suckers on these arms were reported to sigh like the wind through a tomb as they broke the surface. The Dannebrog survived only because the creature chose to descend, but the suction of its departure nearly capsized the vessel. The captain's final entry reads, "We did not see a beast. We saw the bottom of the world rise up to judge us." This account is unique because the captain noted the smell of ancient iodine and wet earth that lingered for days after the encounter. Chapter 6. Anatomy of the Abyssal God, Tentacles and Abyssal Eyes. The archives describe the Kraken as a biological impossibility fashioned from fluid shadows. Kraken fire. Its skin is said to be bioluminescent, flickering with a ghostly blue light that lures fisher, predatory beauty, similar to the Huldrus face or the Nakin's melody. Sailors called this the lantern of the drowned, believing the light was the souls of those previously taken. The beak of bone. Beneath the writhing arms lies a beak made of a material harder than iron, capable of crushing the thickest oak holes. Black gall. When enraged, it releases an ink so thick and foul, it turns the sea into a lightless void for miles, suffocating everything within it. Alchemists in our records once sought this ink, believing it contained the true black necessary for the magnum opus. The abyssal gaze. The most terrifying detail is the eye, a single lidless orb the size of a captain's cabin. It does not look at a ship as prey. It looks at it as a speck of dust. It is the gaze of a god that has forgotten the sun. Chapter 7. The Deep Song. The Music of the Drowning. There is a strange overlap in the archives between the Nakin and the Kraken. While the Nakin plays his violin in the rivers, the Kraken emits a low-frequency hum, a deep song that can be felt through wooden hulls. This sound causes abyssal madness. Modern science might call this infrasound, which can cause hallucinations and extreme dread. But the archives record it as a direct call. Sailors would hear the song of their lost mothers, or the ringing of church bells from their home villages emanating from the black water. This auditory deception would drive men to leap overboard, believing they were walking onto solid ground, only to be taken by tentacles waiting below. The Kraken does not just consume the body, it consumes the mind. Chapter 8. Archived Account. The Ghost Ship Sørensen, 1844. In 1844, the British Royal Navy found a Norwegian schooner, the Sørensen, drifting aimlessly. The ship was perfectly intact, the food still on the plates, but not a single soul was on board. There was no sign of struggle, but the ship's bell had been crushed as if by a giant hand, and the deck was covered in a rotted, translucent slime. In the archives, this is the primary evidence of the Kraken's harvest. The creature can pluck every man from a deck without tipping the ship, leaving a Mary Celeste of the North a monument to the efficiency of the abyss. Our records indicate that Sørensen had iron nails driven into every mast, yet they were bent flat as if the metal itself had surrendered to the creature's presence. Chapter 9. The Biological Shield. From Myth to Giant Squid. As archivists, we bridge the gap between folklore and science. In 1853, a massive carcass washed ashore in Denmark, and science recognized the giant squid Architeuthis ducks. It had the suckers and the beak the archives had described for centuries. The naturalist Peter Steenstrup was the first to realize that the Kraken was not a myth, but a biological reality. He identified the creature from a beak of bone that had been found in 1639 and kept as a curiosity in a Danish cabinet. But the archives ask a darker question. What if the giant squid is merely the infant of the Kraken? What if the true Kraken never surfaces entirely because it is too large to be supported by anything but the pressure of the deepest trenches? The unheard north suggests that the monsters we find are just the ones too weak to stay in the dark. The archives contain a terrifying theory that the Kraken is a continental organism, a creature so large it acts as a foundation for the ocean floor itself. Chapter 10. The Maelstrom. Physics of the Descent. When the Kraken submerges, it does not simply swim. It displaces the ocean. This creates the Maelstrom and the Great Maelstrom. The vacuum, the sudden descent of a mile-wide mass, creates a downward vortex. The hydrostatic pressure change alone is enough to implode a wooden ship. The consumption. Ships are not crushed by tentacles. They are drowned by the physics of the creature's departure. The aftermath, for hours after a Kraken descends. The sea remains glass-like and empty, a void where life has been vacuumed away. In 1872, an American telegraph vessel, the Nordic, was laying cable in the North Atlantic when the cable suddenly vibrated with a frequency that shattered glass on the deck. The cable was eventually retrieved, and it had been sheared through, as if by a massive beak, hundreds of feet below the surface. Chapter 11. Comparative Mythology, the Aspidocolone and the World Serpent. The Kraken does not exist in isolation. The archives contain comparative studies of the Aspidocolone, a giant sea turtle or whale from medieval bestiaries that also masqueraded as an island. However, the Scandinavian Kraken is distinct in its malice. While the Aspidoculon was often a passive trap, the Kraken is an active predator. We also see echoes of Jörmungandr, the world's serpent. While Jörmungandr encircles the world, the Kraken inhabits its depths. One represents the boundary of the world. The other represents its bottomless nature. In some obscure sagas, it is said that the Kraken and Jörmungandr are the two ends of the same ancient thread, holding the North Sea together through their sheer weight. Chapter 12. The Sociological Shield, the Indifferent Deep. Using the lens of the Sociological Shield, the Kraken was a necessary monster for the Nordic people. In the age of exploration, the sea was the ultimate no-man's land. To leave the shore was to leave the protection of the borderland shields, the church bells, and the iron of the village. The Kraken represented the indifference of the deep. It explained why ships disappeared without a trace, turning cold tragedy into a heroic struggle against a titan. If a sailor died because of a monster, they died in a war. If they died because of a storm, they died because of bad luck. The Kraken gave their death a purpose. The Kraken is the physical manifestation of the fear that we are small and the world is very, very deep. This echoes our analysis of the trolls. The monster is a way to personify the lethal indifference of the natural world. Chapter 13. The Ritual of the Sea, Salt and Steel. The archives record that sailors had their own borderland shields. They would nail an iron horseshoe to the mast to ward off sea spirits, just as they warded off trolls on land. Salt. They poured salt into the water if they felt the deep song, believing it's crystalline. Order could repel the chaotic Kraken. Silence. The most common ritual was absolute silence. They believed the Kraken listened for the heartbeat of the human world through the floor of its home. There are accounts of Kraken watchmen whose sole job was to listen with their ears pressed against the hull. If they heard the low hum, they would signal for the sacrifice of the anchor, dropping the heaviest iron object they had to satisfy the Titan's curiosity. Chapter 14. The Archivist's Journal, Reflections on the Abyss. I have spent decades in these archives, surrounded by paper and dust. But as I read the accounts of the Kraken, I feel a dampness in my own bones. We like to think we have conquered the world because we have mapped its surface. But the sea is not a surface, it is a volume. Every map is a lie of omission. We mark the islands, the shoals, and the currents, but we leave the space between them empty. We call it the deep, as if it were a single thing. But the deep is where the Kraken breathes. It is the part of our world that remains, and will always remain, unheard. I sometimes wonder if the archives themselves are a kind of Kraken, a massive, twisted thing of ink and paper that hides more than it reveals. As you listen to this, you are standing on the edge of my world, and beneath us, the ink is deep. Chapter 15. Conclusion. The Abyss stares back. The Kraken is the final boundary of the Midgard Archives. It is the monster that cannot be petrified by the sun like the trolls, nor banished by a holy name like the brook horse. It is as eternal as the tides. When you look over the grey waters, remember that you are looking at a veil. Beneath that veil, in the crushing dark where the light of the sun has never reached, something island-sized is breathing. It is waiting for the next ship to stop. It is waiting for the next fire to be lit on its back. Thank you for visiting the Midgard Archives once more. Subscribe to open the archives and stay in the light. Our next entry will leave the frozen seas and move into the shifting whiteout mists of the winter tundra to find the relentless hunter, the frost giant. But for now, look to the horizon. Is that a new island rising, or is the Kraken simply coming up for air?